The first thing I remember is opening my eyes to total darkness. The kind of oppressive darkness where you can feel the weight of the void pressing on your soul. I began to panic when a soothing voice spoke to me. "Don't be afraid. There's nothing here that will harm you." I reached down and felt the table I was on. It was cold and smooth, but surprisingly comfortable. Was I on an operating table of some kind? Where am I? What am I doing here? The voice spoke again. "You are in your new existence. You are here because you died." What? Was this some kind of joke? I remember things got a little out of hand last night, but... What is this? Some kind of prank? Did John put you up to this? The voice spoke again. I noticed the tones were quite soothing, but something seemed just a little off. "This is no prank, and no, John did not put me up to this." I blinked a few times, trying to wake up. Or at least, I thought I did. In this absolute dark, it was surprisingly hard to tell. "Who are you, and why is it so dark here?" The voice in the darkness answered again. "I am your guide, and it's dark because I have found it best to ease you into your new existence. But I suppose you're ready for more?" With that, the room turned bright. It was the kind of blinding light that would typically have you squinting and shielding your eyes, even without sitting in the darkness of a void just a moment before. But oddly, I found the light to be soothing, almost welcoming. Looking around, I could see I wasn't on a table as I'd thought. I was on the ground, but the ground was the same white color as everything else in there. Where before I had been in a void of darkness, now I was in a void of light. Looking down, it was with some relief that I noticed that I could at least see my own body. Then, looking over, I saw my self-proclaimed guide. I expected wings, gold-trimmed satin, a halo, or some such cliché. But in many ways, they were the definition of simplicity, wearing simple white garments that rode an indistinguishable line between robe and dress. They also wore plain white boots and gloves. The only distinguishing feature was the odd porcelain-looking mask with a split line down the center, going from the top to the bottom, passing through the nose and lips as though the mask was parted in the middle of the face rather than the back. The eyes were visible, though I couldn't tell you what color they were. It was as if they were all colors and no colors simultaneously. I'd call them beautiful, but then again, something was off. So much was off that I began to wonder, are you an angel? Am I in heaven or hell? My guide tilted their head as if considering how to respond. I suppose you could call me an angel, and many have. Of course, others call me a monster or a demon. As far as the question, is this heaven or hell? It's neither, or perhaps both. It really depends on you. As I stood up, I gritted my teeth. I was starting to get frustrated, though I was doubting I was in heaven more and more. I can't imagine an angel being so cryptic. This felt more like someone was waiting to drop some sort of charade, and I was more and more afraid I wouldn't like what was to be revealed. Looking back to my guide, I decided I was tired of this game. What's behind your mask? What are you hiding from me? The entity reached up and touched the mask delicately, as if to remind themselves it was in place. I wear this mask for you. In my experience, humans find my natural appearance difficult to process. That didn't seem to bode well for me, but I steadied myself and pushed on. Can you take it off? The mask, I mean. My guide nodded. I can, and if you ask me to, I will, though I do not recommend it, at least not yet. As I said, humans have difficulty processing what lies underneath. I felt a sense of dread at their words, but if I was in hell, I wanted to know rather than play this stupid game for who knows how long. But that didn't mean I had to be rude about it. "Then I'd like you to take it off, please." The entity nodded. "As you wish." They reached up, grabbed hold of the mask in the middle, as I had suspected, and pulled it off to either side, revealing their true face. And what I saw made me fall back onto the floor, covering my face in an attempt to hide from them. As they'd said, my mind refused to comprehend what lay underneath, but I clearly remember the eyes. So many eyes. Although perhaps that's misleading, for they were no eyes as we know them, and yet I could tell that the entity could see me more honestly and entirely than anyone, including myself, ever did. They saw everything I'd ever done, everything I'd ever thought, and everything I ever felt. There was no deceiving them, or even myself in their omnipresent gaze. All those white lies we tell others, and even ourselves, to justify what we need to get by from one day to the next, melted away like a thin wax veneer under the sun's scorching heat. They were great and terrifying. In their presence, I was nothing. As I curled up into a ball in the fetal position in a futile attempt to hide from the beautiful nightmare before me, the light faded, and I was once again bathed in a now welcome void of darkness. I don't know how long I lay like that, when the soothing voice spoke to me again. "Would you like me to leave?" Unbidden came the images of the thing behind the mask, and it took me several long moments to answer. "Is that an option? Will you simply leave if I ask you to?" The voice sounded as soothing as before. "Yes, I am your guide and I am here for your benefit. If you feel I am of no use to you, I will leave at your request." That statement left me wondering between two impossible fears: facing the entity behind that mask again, or sitting alone in the void, possibly forever. I debated with myself for something between a minute and an hour. Then, in a moment of compulsion, I reached out into the darkness. "Can I touch you?" The soothing voice simply answered, "Of course." I don't know what I expected. A part of me wondered if their touch would be cold like the grave. Another part of me feared some new existential experience like the sight of their unmasked face. But instead, their grip was as soothing as their voice. It was a gentle pressure, perhaps lightly cool, but comforting the way a hug from a loved one can be. I took another breath. "Could you repeat what you first told me?" There was another gentle pressure as the entity squeezed my hand. "Don't be afraid. There's nothing here that will harm you." I closed my eyes, not that it made any difference, and took a deep breath before speaking again. "All right, I think I'm good now. Please, turn the lights back on. Just please have the mask back in place." With a third hand squeeze, my guide responded, "Of course," and the light returned. I looked around in the bright light momentarily before turning back to my guide with trepidation. I half expected to re-experience the same overwhelming sensation, but with their mask back in place, it was only a fading memory. Though I could certainly understand how they could be thought of as either an angel or a demon, for half a moment I thought back to the old biblical line, "Be not afraid," and realized that's essentially exactly what my guide had said. Now I was less sure than ever if this was heaven or hell. Looking back into the void, I had another thought. Is this all there is? Us and this empty void? My guides shook their head. "No, there is far more. This is just a place of respite so you can process and acclimate to your new life in the comfort of a reality similar to the one you used to know. You may return here anytime you wish." I didn't know if I should be excited or worried about what was to come, though given my experience so far, I figured a little of both. But if nothing else, curiosity would probably kill this cat, so I decided to rip the band-aid off. Well then, can I see whatever is outside this place? My guide simply nodded and pointed to a door that wasn't a door. For a moment, I wondered if they'd created or summoned the door, but a part of me knew it had always been there. My mind had simply refused to process it. As I walked over to the door, I felt like my perception was expanding, like my field of view was stretching beyond 180 degrees. Everything extended and twisted, yet remained perfectly perceivable as to what it was simultaneously. It was like my mind was expanding with my eyes to process the same information I was familiar with, but in a whole new way. When I reached the door, I hesitated for a moment, afraid of what lay beyond. My guide was there beside me, and as odd as it sounds, I took comfort in their presence. So after only a moment's hesitation, I stepped through. What greeted me was a beautiful open meadow, and kind of like what I expected the Greeks might have thought of the Elysian fields might look like. It was gorgeous, and I could have stood there for hours and taken it all in if curiosity wasn't pushing me forward. I took a step, and the world spun around me. I stopped again, and everything was still and as beautiful as before, but also somehow different. Something was off, but I couldn't quite explain what. Unsure of what was happening, I took another step, and the world shifted again. But this time I realized it wasn't spinning. It was unfolding, like there were pockets of reality floated within the space between what I could see, and as I walked, some of those pockets folded open, while others I saw before folded close, and in the slivers of yet more pockets, I could see something else. People. More specifically, people I knew. I took another step, looking carefully for those slivers of pockets with people, and realized they were all people I knew in places I'd been. Every moment of my life was contained within those pockets. Not just the visual and audio parts, but also my thoughts and feelings. It was similar to my experience when I'd asked my guide to remove their mask, only thankfully in smaller, more digestible chunks. In one pocket was the moment I lost my first tooth. I couldn't remember that until now, but after experiencing that pocket of reality, it all returned to me like it had just happened. The next step revealed my 21st birthday. Things had gotten a little crazy, as to be expected, but it was good seeing all my family and friends again. And taking another step, I pulled up to the time a friend and I had gone bowling together for the first time. I was grinning like a fool at the rush those emotions brought back to me. Then, with the next step, the world fell out from under me. Not literally, more like the emotions that came with it drove a metaphorical white-hot poker through the pit of my stomach. It was when I ruined a perfectly happy relationship with a moment of selfishness. I could feel the rush of emotions that pushed me on, excitement, eagerness, and more, all blurred by the effects of whatever I'd had to drink, but it was tainted by my knowledge of what would follow after. Not wanting to see more, I stepped away again, walking into a moment where I had been bored waiting in the dentist's office as a kid. I took a moment to catch my breath in the benign experience, then shifted my gaze away from the pocket and onto the horizon. And once again, I was in a beautiful field with my guide beside me. I stood there, taking in the field as I recovered from that confusing combination of experiences. Finally, I turned to my guide. What was that? I mean, I know it was me, but how? I mean, what's happening? The being looked at me and then gestured to the field. This is your world. It's made of every action, thought, and feeling you've ever had. When you learn to look, you can even see your dreams, and in time, you can craft new ones. This is your new reality, to do with as you please. The only thing you can't do is lie to yourself or anyone who visits. I turned to my guide in surprise. People can visit me here, like people I knew? The entity nodded. Anyone can visit, whether you knew them or not. You simply have to invite them. I looked back into the pocket between the folds of reality to the young me sitting in the dentist's office, kicking his legs onto the chair and back again. like a pendulum on some old clock. And if someone visits, they'll see all this too? My guide nodded. Yes, but they'll also bring their worlds with them, meaning you will see their world as well. Nothing can be hidden. All is laid bare. Thinking back to my past and the many weird and sometimes horrible things I'd done, I suddenly couldn't imagine inviting anyone into my world. While I'd argue I hadn't lived that bad of a life, I simply couldn't imagine exposing my deepest, darkest secrets to anyone, ever. Was I doomed to live my life in this world alone? Forever? Now I was sure. This was definitely hell. Turning back to the entity that called itself my guide, I finally let some of my frustration out. What kind of lame long-term torture is this? Will you slowly ramp it up as time passes until you're doing the whole fire and brimstone shtick? Or do you just let us ride this out until we go insane? What's your end goal here? The entity looked back at me with that infuriatingly emotionless mask. This is not meant to torture or reward you. It simply is what it is, the next stage of existence. Rather than being limited to the 3 dimensions you're used to, you've expanded your horizon, so to speak. It will take time, but eventually, you'll learn to walk through this field as easily as you could any meadow back in your previous life, and then you can start building something new in it. What was this entity saying? That I now live in 4 or 5 dimensions rather than 3? That sounded ridiculous, impossible. And how long will that take? Days, weeks, months, centuries? How long will I suffer here before I can walk through this field so easily? My guide shook their head. You're still missing the truth of this place. Time is no longer a limiting factor. Every step you take shifts you through time as well as space. Learning to navigate that is difficult, yes, but the time it takes is irrelevant. I shook my head in frustration. Time is irrelevant. Easy for you to say. This is all too much. I can't. I can't. I started to have a panic attack. Then the entity pointed behind me. Turning my head, I saw the void of light had moved with me, making it easy to simply step back through, which I immediately did. I'm unsure how long I sat in the void with my knees up and my head resting in my hands and my guide at my side. I wondered if they'd grow impatient, but they simply stood there and waited quietly as though they had no concerns whatsoever. After enough time, I finally raised my head and looked at my companion. So, how many people retreat into this void and never come out? They tilted their head again as if in thought. As time flows normally in here, relative to your understanding, some stay in this place for years or even centuries, hiding or meditating as they wish. Others hop in and out countless times, trying to ease into the experience. But eventually, everyone leaves and begins exploring their new reality. It was so hard to fully grasp. I shook my head to clear it. What about inviting those people to my world? You said I could invite anyone, but how could they come to my world if they're hiding their voids? My guide shook their head again. You still don't grasp it. Time is irrelevant out there. You might be meeting someone for the first time when it's their 1000th meeting you. They could spend entire millennia in their world, and you can meet them out there like no time had passed. You could even visit them in their life before this if you wish. You'll be something they can't fully understand or even perceive, but they might see you out of the corner of their eye or even in their dreams. Thinking back to all the people I'd known, all the people I wanted to see again, I was once again overcome with dread at the idea of revealing all my deepest, darkest secrets. How could I look them in the eye, knowing they knew every horrible or unflattering thing I'd ever thought or said? I looked back to my guide. But how do you know I'll do it? How do you know I'll succeed in figuring all this out? Nothing in my guide's mask changed, but for the first time, I felt like they were smiling. Because, as I keep telling you, time is irrelevant. and you've already done it." Then they reached up and pulled apart their mask again. I watched like a deer caught in a car's headlights as the entity revealed its face once more. Again, everything it had seen and all it understood weighed down on me like a suffocating weight, but this time I didn't turn away. At first, I couldn't focus as their face seemed to be a blur, but as I focused my gaze the same way I did towards the pockets outside, I could finally make out their eyes. There was complete understanding in their eyes of all I'd done and all that I was, but there was no judgment, just acceptance. As I continued to focus my gaze, I was astounded to realize that I was looking at myself. Not like a mirror, not as I am now, but as I would be, or perhaps as I already was. With that revelation, my guide smiled before speaking one last time. "You've got it from here. It won't be easy, but remember, you believe in yourself whether you realize it or not. Now go do what you have to do, and don't forget to lend yourself a helping hand when you need it." And then I was alone. Looking down at my hands, they seemed to blur like my guide's face had done before. As I held them up, I closed my eyes and focused my vision until they came into focus once more. They were my hands, but were they my hands as they were now, or as they will be then? With a slight shake of my head, I decided it didn't matter and turned and walked back into the meadow, back into my world.